Good. Hello. I'm just going to introduce to you now the concept of ILCs in music, independent learning challenges, because this is the first independent learning challenge that will be set to Key Stage 3 students, that's you, in Year 7. Now, there are going to be 6 independent learning challenges, which are essentially large homework projects that will be set during your Key Stage 3 music education. And they'll each last approximately 1 term. So the first one, this one that I'm talking about now, is going to last you the autumn term, and the hand-in dates you'll be able to find on the school website, along with the link that you've just followed to find this video. Now, it's quite easy for me to assess performance when you're working in groups, at least when you're working in relatively small groups. I can see quite clearly which students are contributing what to a performance, and so it makes it quite feasible to be able to assess individual students, that's you, during class time. The same applies to listening exercises, the other key practical component of music, which is listening and analysis, simply by giving written assessments during listening exercises, and assessing what key principles you've picked up during a class. Composing, making up your own music, is a little bit more tricky to assess in groups, because if I ask you to compose something in a group, it's very difficult really for you to document thoroughly which part of a composition you contributed and what was contributed by other students. And for that reason, all of the independent learning challenges in music are composing based. In other words, they're related to you making up your own music. And that applies to all 6 ILCs, this one included. Now, what I would like you to do for your ILC is I would like you to compose a piece of music. It could be in any style. It can be in a specific style if you have an awareness and particular enjoyment of a given style, such as pop music, ballads, or that sort of thing that you listen to on a regular basis. That's absolutely fine. Equally, it could be in your own style. You know, it could be that you start the process of composing really without worrying too much about what's gone before and the sort of music that you typically listen to. Just allow your own style to sort of come through by exploring sounds. So I don't mind at all ultimately what the style of the piece that you're going to create is going to be. What I am interested in is that you're able to apply and show me that you've understood some of the musical techniques that we cover in class. So we learn techniques by performing them either as a full class or in small groups in the classroom. But the other aspect of you showing me your understanding is going to be through independent learning challenges such as this, where you actually compose, you create your own music using some of those devices and techniques that we've looked at. I'm far, far, far more interested in you showing me through real music making your understanding than trying to explain it in words. Now, the key to this first composition, this first independent learning challenge, is I would like you to produce 2 things for me. The first is I would like you to produce what's known as a graphic score. And a graphic score is a simple way for you to sketch out a high-level picture, if you like, of what your composition, what your music is going to be like. So it's like a pictorial representation of your plan for your composition. I'll show you an example of a graphics score in a moment, and you can use some of the ideas from that if you like, or you can use your own. It really doesn't matter. What matters is that you do have some sort of plan at this stage as to what your music will look like once it's finished, or what it'll sound like indeed. The second thing beyond the graphic score that I would like you to hand in as part of this homework exercise is a recording of the resulting music. Okay, so bear in mind you don't necessarily have to perform your composition yourself. You can, if you like, get a friend or a group of friends or musicians that you like to work with. You can get them to perform it on your behalf, but bear in mind that that process itself does take time, because your friends will need to understand what it is you're looking for. They need to learn the music that you've created, and they will need to rehearse it as a group in addition to actually recording a performance that I can hear. There are a number of ways that you can produce your recorded output. One is, and this is very unusual at this stage, given that we've only really just started at senior school, secondary school. One means of producing music for me in a way that I can hear is to actually produce a traditionally notated score. So you can take your graphics score and turn it into actual written music that instrumentalists and singers could read and perform straight off the page. And that would be fine for me, because I'll be able to read that and know exactly how you want it to sound. Whereas a graphics score is a little bit more abstract. It's more difficult for me to really get a sense of what it is you're looking for. That's rare at this stage, as I say, because it takes a lot of time to learn how to do that properly, how to notate using traditional notated music. But if you have those skills, that's perfectly valid. You can hand me a written score of your music. I wouldn't envisage that your resulting music would last any more than a minute in duration. I would caution you from using too many instruments or sources of sound, because the more instruments you use, the more work you have in terms of putting it all together. Structurally, what I would absolutely expect to see is a very clear beginning, middle and end to your piece of music. Your music will be surrounded by silence, one of the 8 elements of music. So it's effectively born from nothing in terms of sound. And when it begins, it's up to you really whether it begins with lots of things happening at the same time, or whether it might be just a single voice in the wilderness. You know, it could be a single flute line. Or indeed, it doesn't have to be a traditional instrumental sounds that you're using. You could use the sound of dropping cutlery into a kitchen drawer as a basis for a percussion instrument, for example. So feel free to think outside the box. But in any case, there should be a very clear beginning to your piece. It will then go on and develop. So typically, you will introduce new ideas, but I would caution you from introducing too many new ideas. If you get a nice idea, a musical idea that sounds good, repetition is not a bad thing. It often takes a good few repetitions before we think, okay, I'm ready for a new idea to appear now. So don't just throw lots and lots of musical ideas at this, because we might find ourselves feeling confused when we listen to it. So we've got our clear beginning. It grows gradually with the introduction of new ideas, perhaps new instruments, perhaps changes of other elements in the music, and then there should be a clear ending. It should be very obvious that the piece has come to a satisfactory close. Okay, and that's probably the most basic structure that exists in music, simply to consider music as consisting of a beginning, a middle, and an end. Other methods of recording include just using your phone to record a live performance. That's a pretty straightforward way as well, and probably the most common at this stage. Once you've got your musicians knowing what they're doing, roll up your phone, press record, count the musicians in, and just record the performance, and I will know precisely what it is that you've achieved. And another means of recording your work, and I know there are some of you in Year 7 who already use software called sequencers. There are lots of different types, different brands of software that fall under the heading sequencers. And what a sequencer does is it allows you on a computer to record one track at a time. So you could record, for example, a simple drum beat, and then you could perhaps have that playing for 4 bars or so, and then just as we're starting to think, okay, I've got this groove, I'm enjoying this, before our attention wanders, you could add a bass loop, a little riff on a bass guitar, for example, and then perhaps some piano chords, and then voice, and so on. And rather than relying on live musicians to put all this stuff together, the advantage with using a sequencer is that you're able to record each of these things yourself, one layer at a time, and gradually build up the texture of your piece of music. But again, we haven't looked at how that software works at this stage, but I don't want to rule out you using that sort of technology if you're familiar with it. When I come to assess your learning challenge, and please bear in mind that my assessment of this homework, it also forms basis of my overall assessment of what you are learning in music lessons. I'm looking for a couple of things. First of all, I'm looking for a demonstration of the fact that you understand, or are beginning to understand, the importance of the musical elements. Now, the musical elements, just to reiterate, are those things in music that always exist, no matter where the music comes from, no matter what the style, no matter which part of the world the music comes from. Music is a hugely diverse art form. And some of the things that we find in the sort of pop music and classical music that we listen to here in the West, as we call it, are not in any way common in other musics of the world. However, when you get right down to the elements of music, those elements always exist in all music. Okay, now we're covering those elements in class. And just to give you a little clue, there are 8 elements. I mentioned one earlier, that was silence. Okay, incredibly important that music is not just chock-a-block full of sound. Silence has its own power and occurs in all forms of music. But there are another 7, and they are depicted all around your classroom because they're so important. Every one of those elements needs to be considered. If we take the second element, for example, dynamics, which simply put is effectively volume, it's really unusual that you would hear an entire piece of music all at the same volume. That would get really tiresome on our ears. It's much more expressive, much more musical if we consider precisely when to grow volume, when to decrease volume, when suddenly there should be drops or increases in volume, and that sort of thing. And I'll be looking for that sort of consideration for all of the elements, and that's one of the things that I'm really interested in looking at when I look at your compositions, and it always will be. The elements of music are so incredibly important. The second thing, though, that I will be assessing is compositional techniques. Okay, and compositional techniques are the sorts of things that we are covering in class. Little tricks of the trade, little things that composers do to help them build up music in a satisfactory way. Now, virtually every class we cover a compositional technique, and I don't expect you to use every single one, but I will be looking for at least 2 basic techniques. So basic techniques might include things like use of primary chords to accompany a tune, a melody, or the use of polyrhythms to help develop a piece. And advanced techniques, I'll be looking for at least one of those for students looking to get the top marks. Advanced techniques include things like modulation or changing the key of a piece of music in the middle of that music. Now, you don't have to use techniques that I'm teaching you during class time. I will give credit for any technique that you use, and of course the overall effectiveness of your piece of music. So to summarize, I'm looking for a piece of music from you that will be planned out using a graphic score. It will be no more than a minute in length, and please don't get too worried about the length of the piece, because in particular I'm looking for a clear structure, just a beginning, a middle and an end, and I'm looking to see that you've considered the elements of music that we've talked about in class, and also that you're starting to use some of these compositional techniques that we're covering in class time.